Good evening. Welcome to our weekly sparks of the Parsha, the tidbits on different parts of the weekly Torah portion. This week we begin a new book, the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. It also happens to be the Shabbos before the most important holiday, the holiday of Shavuos, the anniversary of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. So we're going to have to understand what is the connection between this Torah reading and the holiday. And I just want to preface that the Torah readings were not set in a way that we follow the cycle of the year. It's not as if the first Parsha of the year talks about Rosh Hashanah, the second talks about Yom Kippur. It's Genesis till the end of Deuteronomy, and sometimes the subject matter of the Parsha has nothing to do, at least not on the open, not overtly, with any holidays in that particular week. But the Shalah, one of the great halachic and Kabbalists, halachic authorities and Kabbalists of about 350 years ago, he writes that whenever we have a Torah reading that coincides with a special occasion, a holiday, there is always a connection. If you don't see the connection overtly, you have to just penetrate beneath the surface and you'll see that they're connected. So we have to find a connection between this week's Torah portion and the upcoming holiday of Shavuos, the anniversary of the giving of the Torah. So the first connection is the very name of the book and of the Parsha. You see, the word Bamidbar, which is the name of the book, the entire book, known as the Book of Numbers in English, is also the name of this weekly Parsha. So Bamidbar simply means in the desert, because God speaks to Moses in the desert. That's how this book and this Parsha begins. The fact that the Torah underscores the location where God speaks to Moses, that it was in the desert, tells us something about the Torah itself. That the Torah was given specifically in a desert. God could have given the Torah in Egypt before they left. He could have waited for them to go into the land of Israel and given them the Torah there. Why did he give the Torah to them in a desert? So this is a question that is asked by the Midrash, and there are several answers given. One of the answers is that if God had given the Torah in a place that is inhabited, it would be a place that has an owner. And therefore, someone would think that Torah belongs to one group. There's an owner to Torah. And if someone who's not the owner would like to take part of that piece of territory known as the Torah, that would be theft. So in order to dispel that notion that the Torah belongs to any specific group or any specific individual to the exclusion of all others, the Torah was given in a desert which doesn't belong to anyone. At least in those days, deserts were not claimed. When they found oil in the deserts, that changed. Deserts became very lucrative places. But in those days, a desert was a place that nobody wanted to claim. Why? Because it's a desolate place, and therefore anyone could lay claim to it. That's the Torah. The Torah belongs to every Jew, and no Jew could ever be told, the Torah was not meant for you, you have no right to the Torah. The lowest level Jew has as much a right to the Torah, and it's as much his as the highest level Jew. So that's one explanation why the Torah was given in a desert. Another explanation is, there are many explanations, I'm only going to give you one more. Another explanation is that a desert is a symbol of humility. There's nothing there. There's nothing that grows there. There's nothing that makes it a place that anyone would want to occupy and live in. It's a place of snakes and scorpions. It's the lowest of the low. In order for a person to be receptive to Torah, they have to have this humility. There's another metaphor for that, and that's the fact that it was given on Mount Sinai, which is the lowest of all the mountains. And last week we explained that even though it's a mountain, and a person has to have some degree of assertiveness, especially when it comes to Judaism, they can't just be allowed for others to trample on you and give in to whatever pressures that one may encounter and not follow the Torah. You have to be like a mountain. You have to be strong, but you also have to be humble. Well, the desert really exemplifies that idea of humility. That way you're totally receptive to Torah. And in simple terms, this means that when you're learning Torah, and this is something that's true about any subject, but especially with Torah, if you come into a classroom, you're being taught by a teacher, whatever the subject is, and you have preconceived notions what the subject is all about, you have your own opinions, your own ideas, you're not going to be receptive to the teacher, you won't absorb anything that he's teaching, and you wasted your time because it's going to bounce off you. You're looking at the teaching from your own perspective. You're not open to hear the others. You can disagree later when you're dealing with general subjects, but you can't disagree if you didn't absorb it, if you didn't understand where the teacher is coming from. So when a person goes into a classroom, they have to block their own perceptions, their own preconceived notions, their own opinions about the subject. Just be an open slate to take in whatever is being given. Now that's true with any discipline, but it's much more true with Torah. Why? Because Torah is not man-made. It's not secular. It's divine knowledge. To be receptive to something divine, by definition, it's impossible because we are finite. We have our own finite dimensions. How could we absorb something that's infinite? And the answer is that God says you could if you divest yourself of your own ego, of your own status, and you're just completely like a desert, and in the desert you're able to absorb even something that is infinite. So that's one of the reasons why we read Bamidbar in the desert before the holiday of Shavuos, because that's a prerequisite for receiving the Torah. Now, the book of Bamidbar is also known in English and also in Hebrew as the book of Numbers, Chumash HaPekudim. Why is it the book of Numbers? 3 guesses. Because it deals with numbers, and it deals with numbers, and it deals with numbers. All 3 guesses are correct. That means that the theme of this book is about counting of the Jewish people. Several times we find them being counted. What does counting signify? You count something that has value. When you count something, you indicate that this has value, in spite of the fact that there's more of this, whatever it is that you're counting. Each unit has value. And by God counting the Jewish people, God was conferring on them a certain unique status. There's a principle in Jewish law that if you have a non-kosher substance that falls into a vat of kosher food, 60 times the ratio, the kosher is 60 to 1, the one non-kosher, when it gets mixed up, is no longer non-kosher. You can eat the whole mixture. So a little piece of pork falls into a vat of stew, and it's mixed up, and you can't tell one from the other. It's all one big mishmash. And if there's a ratio of 60 to 1, you can eat it. It may not be very appealing and it's appetizing to many people, but it's kosher. But there are many exceptions to that rule. One of the exceptions to the rule is that if it's something that people count, it's something that is valuable, that when you go to the store, you count one item separate from the next item, and then it falls in, it cannot become neutralized. It will not be nullified because it has importance and it has significance. And something that's significant doesn't lose its identity. And that's the power of being Jewish. We are a minority, and we have always been a minority, and it seems like it's a real bizarre thing that we should be a minority because we're around longer than almost any other nation on earth. So if we are here for thousands of years, by now we should have had billions and billions of followers of our people. But we know that the reason why we don't have that many people is because of persecution, because of genocide, because of assimilation. But there's also a deeper spiritual reason. And the deeper spiritual reason is that God is trying to tell the world quantity does not determine importance. The Jewish people are the smallest of the nations of the world, but we are special because we have a unique relationship with God. And that's why God counts us. By doing that, God is saying, you are special. I will count every single one of you. I won't look at you as one mass of humanity, 20 million, 100 million, a billion, and so on and so forth. Each individual has value. And there's another connection between that and the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Our sages tell us that if one Jew would have been missing at the time that the Torah was given, the Torah would not have been given. Every single Jew had to be there. And we're told that not just the Jews who were alive at that time, but every soul of every Jew for all of eternity was standing at Mount Sinai when the Torah was given. There's a beautiful point that was made by a convert to Judaism. His name was Count Potocki. This was a Polish count whose parents were the counts, and he was the son of the count. And he got interested in theology, and he finally became a Jew. He secretly went to another country, I believe it was Holland, where it was permissible to convert to Judaism. He became a Jew and returned to his hometown in Vilna. And no one knew who it was. At least he thought no one knew, because he didn't look the same. He grew a beard and so on. And he would sit and study Torah the whole time. And once there was an incident where some kids were poking fun at him and causing him distress, and he got upset and he chased them out. Well, the parents of these kids knew the secret, because there was rumors in town that he was the son of the count and he had converted, and he was reported to his parents, and the parents put him on trial, his own parents, and he was sentenced to die. And he was burnt alive with the consent and approval of his parents. It's not a comfortable part of history, but I think the world has to know what was done to the Jewish people over the ages. Well, this Count Potocki was once asked, how does it happen that all of a sudden you become a Jew? You weren't born that way. Now, of course, that's not a legitimate question, because the Torah says that one can convert to Judaism provided it's done in accordance with Jewish law, which is, of course, the way he did it. But they wanted to have him give an original answer to the question, and he said the following. Before the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, the Talmud says that God went to all the nations of the world and asked them if they would like to accept the Torah. And when they asked for a sample and God gave them one, they said, no, it's not for us. He came to the Jewish people, and they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will accept it, we will do it, and we will listen and hear what it's all about. So God says, okay, I'll give the Jews the Torah. That's the story in the works of the Talmud and Midrash. So this Count Potocki asked the question, but what's going on over here? Could we say that all non-Jews would have turned down the Torah? There certainly would have been some that would have accepted it. Maybe they did. And could you say that every Jew was enthusiastic about accepting the Torah? I'm sure there were some that weren't, but God went by the majority. He says, but what happens to that minority? He says the minority of Jews that wouldn't want the Torah, their descendants eventually veered away from it and even converted to other religions. However, the minority of non-Jews who did want the Torah but didn't get it because the majority prevailed, they are the ones, their souls, or their children's souls, were the ones that eventually became Jewish. But that is his way of putting another way of looking at it, which is similar, is that all the souls of all Jews, including converts to Judaism, stood there at Mount Sinai. So if someone looks familiar to you and you never can figure out where you saw that Jew, you saw him at Sinai. There's online there's a program from Finding Your Match. It's called Saw You at Sinai. But we were all at Sinai, yes.
If all Jews for all eternity were at Sinai, Does that mean my soul was there too?
Yes.
Is that right?
Everyone's soul was there. Some were in bodies and some were not in bodies, but we were all there at Sinai, so we all received the Torah. And not only those who are Jewish, but even those souls of the converts, they also got the Torah at Mount Sinai. Okay. Rashi comments on God counting the Jewish people. And Rashi says something very interesting. Because he loves them so much, God loves Jewish people so much, he's always counting them. When they left Egypt, he counted them. When they fell and died because of the golden calf, he counted to know how many survived. And when he came to dwell amongst them, to bring his Shekhinah, his divine presence amongst them, he also counted them. And when did that happen? That happened in the first of Nisan. That's when the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was put up. And a month later, the first of Iyar, he counted them. So there are several questions over here. Question number one, Rashi says because he loves them, he's always counting them. And he gives 3 occasions in which he counted them. You know what? 3 occasions is not the same thing as saying always. If in the course of 40 years, okay, this is not 40 years, this is a little over a year, he counts them 3 times, but he didn't count them again until the end of the 40 years, one is not going to say that he's always counting them. If he counted them every day, you could say always. But 3 times in over a year. And then, the next question is, the 3rd time he counted them is the first of the month of Iyar. And why did he count them then? Because he wanted to dwell amongst them. When did that happen? The 1st of Nisan, a month earlier. Why did he wait a month to count them? If God's counting them is showing his love for them, and the expression of love is when he comes to live with them, why did he wait a month? So one way of explaining it is, in a relationship, there are 3 times, 3 situations where the relationship is more vulnerable. One is the beginning of a relationship. In the beginning of a relationship, you don't know how things are going to work out, so you're a little bit hesitant, and you're afraid to bare your soul because you don't want to be disappointed. You don't want to invest so much in a relationship, and then a while later it's going to turn out to be nothing. That's one example. Another example is if the other side betrays you, the other side is unfaithful. And even though they want to make amends, it's a very difficult time to show affection because there's a betrayal. And the 3rd situation is when you already are accustomed to that individual. You know, your relationship has lost its steam, it's lost its ardor. The honeymoon is over. So these are the 3 occasions that God says, I'm still going to count you to show you my love. Sure, God shows us love all the time, but even in these 3 situations, the first situation when they came out of Egypt, that's the beginning of the relationship. There's no indication how it's going to end, how it's going to develop and progress. And God says, you know what? I'm going to count you. I want to show you my love for you. The 2nd time is after the golden calf. That's when we betrayed God. You would think God said, well, okay, I'm not going to show you my love so quickly. It's going to take a lot of time for things to heal. No, God counted them very soon after. And the 3rd time is when God moved in with us. We built the Mishkan, and God moves in. A month later, if he had counted us then, obviously that's the honeymoon. But a month later, the honeymoon is over. God says, I'm still going to count you. I'm not going to get bored with you. Those are the 3 situations where God counts them. We're still in the first verse. The Torah begins the first verse as follows. And God speaks to Moses, where in the wilderness of Sinai, I would translate it in the desert of Sinai, Right now, Sinai is called a desert. Why did it? I don't know why they emphasize always wilderness. A desert is a desert. Anyhow, it's in the wilderness or desert of Sinai. Then it goes into the details. Where exactly? In the tent of meeting. So which is first? First, it gives you the general location in the Sinai desert. Then it gives you the specific location in the tent of meeting. Okay, so that seems to be the style. First, you give the general. You tell someone you want to travel to this place. You tell them first the city, then you tell them the street. On the GPS, I think it works the other way around. First, they ask you the street number. No, first the city, then whatever. We're not going to reconcile everything with the Torah. Then, when it gives you the date, it says on the first of the second month in the second year. So it gives you first the day of the month, and then the year. First the specific, and then the more general. Why does it reverse the order? First, when it comes to location, it's the general followed by the specific. When it comes to the time, it's the specific followed by the general. That question is asked by the Or HaChaim, one of the greatest Sephardic commentators, lived about 250 years ago. And his answer is like this, that no, in both places, it's the specific, then the general. Because what is the location? The desert, Sinai desert, and the tent of meeting. The tent of meeting is a much larger area than the whole Sinai desert, because that's God's location. And God's location is without a limit. There's an expression used in Kabbalah and Chassidus. He is the space of the world, but the world is not his space. What does that mean? That God, he fills all space, but he's beyond space. So yes, so first it tells you the specifics. It's in a small area called the Sinai Desert, and then it tells you it's in the tent of meeting. The tent of meeting represents the whole universe and beyond. But then there's a simpler explanation given by, I believe, the Dinover Rebbe. And he says the following. He says, in the days of Moses, the Torah was given in general terms. And from the general terms, they had to extrapolate as to what the details are. Now, it's the other way around. Now, we have so many details over the years, over the centuries and millennia. We have an accumulation of so much information that we have to then try to find out what are the general principles. That's the process of halacha today. If someone has a question about modern technology and how to relate it to the Torah, well, the Torah doesn't discuss modern technology. So what do? You study the laws of the Torah about that general subject. You go through all the details, and from those details you try to extract the principle behind them. Once you have the principle, you can apply it to everything. So now what we do is we go through the details to find the principles. In the days of Moses, it was the other way around. It was the details were extracted from the principles. That's why the first half of the verse, where it talks about the general area, the Sinai desert, that describes how life was then. But the second part of the verse describes how it will be, how it is now. Just a cute little tidbit. Moses counts the Jews together with the leaders of each tribe. One of the leaders, the tribe of Shimon, was named Shlumiel. Now in Yiddish, a Shlumiel is a hapless Shlumiel. I mean, he's someone who's always is messing up his life. never does anything, never succeeds. They say the difference between a shlumil, a shlemazel, and a nudnik is the shlumil pours soup, hot soup, on the lap of the shlemazel, and the nudnik wants to know what kind of soup it was. But a shlemazel comes from the word shalo mazel. He doesn't have any luck. But where does shlumil come from? So some say that it comes from the leader of this tribe of Shimon, whose name was Shlumiel. And why was he called Shlumiel? I mean, not why he was called Shlumiel, but what do we know about him? We don't know that much about him necessarily, but we know that his tribe was a very poor tribe. Of all the 12 tribes, the tribe of Shimon was the poorest. Because when Jacob was on his deathbed, he realized that Shimon and Levi, those two brothers, were trouble when they were together, because they were the ones who sold Joseph. So he said, I'm going to scatter them all over. I'm not going to let them be together. They're going to be scattered all over. So Levi are the Kohanim, the priests, and the Levites. They have to go around collecting for their support. The tribe of Shimon are going to be the tutors, the teachers, and they're going to be scattered all over looking for people to teach. And as a result, I mean, how much do teachers make? I mean, they didn't have unions in those days. These teachers were traveling around to look for a little tutoring job here or there. So Shimon was a poor tribe. They were Shlomils. They didn't have any success in life. And who was the leader of Shimon at that time? Shlomil. I don't know how serious of an interpretation that is, but that's something that has been mentioned. The Torah recounts events of the past, and it talks about how Aaron had two sons that died. It says, Vayamas Nadav Avihu. Nadav and Avihu died. But it uses the singular, Vayamas, and he died. So the question is asked, why does it use the singular when it's talking about two people? So again, this interpretation might not be the most serious one, but the Talmud says that a man without a wife is a half of a person. Well, marriage is what makes the person whole, because marriage represents the two halves of one soul that was separated at birth, reunited in marriage. Sometimes one half of a soul could also accomplish, it compensates. There's, God forbid, a person has a heart attack or a stroke, so then the body has ways of developing collateral pathways, and people could learn to function, use the brain to function in different ways than before. Well, the same thing is true with every spiritual handicap. But if a person never marries, then they're only a half, but somehow, because they're handicapped, they find other ways of making themselves whole. But the concept is that a man without a wife is only a half a person. Nadav and Avihu, those two sons of Aaron, never got married. And not because they couldn't find anyone that they liked, but because, as a matter of principle, they were ascetics who were divorced from the physical world. They died, as we discussed many times, because their passion for God was so intense that their souls left their bodies. But the fact that they didn't get married is part of that dynamic. They couldn't be part of this physical world. They couldn't live a physical marital life. So that's why the Torah uses the singular, because each one of them was only a singular, was not a plural person, did not have that quality of being married. That's, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
You're not impressed with this interpretation.
Well, it's just one becomes two becomes one.
Right. Now, everyone was counted from what age and up? The age of 20. Why not earlier than 20? Because 20 was the age of conscription. 20 was the age that you were going out to fight. That's why you mentioned before the class, in Ethics of the Fathers, it says that the age of 18 is the age of marriage, 20 is the age of pursuing. The way it's interpreted, that's when you take on the world, you pursue a career, you pursue a livelihood. And the age of 20 was considered to be an age of real maturity. Even though 13 is bar mitzvah, that's moral responsibilities. But let's say a person inherits property from his father, they wouldn't let the child engage in commerce with that property until the age of 20. Because, under the age of 20, he's a kid. And who knows what he's going to do to ruin the estate of his father, squander it. So 20 is a special age of maturity, and that's when all the Jewish men were counted. The tribe of Levi was counted from the age of 1 month. Now, why were they counted from the age of 1 month? So Rashi explains that God said, I have a problem because I know that in the future, all Jews over the age of 20 would be destined not to enter the promised land. So I'm concerned that the tribe of Levi shouldn't be among them, because if they were to be counted from the age of 20, then they would be lumped together with everyone else and they would all perish in the desert. Now, I don't want that tribe to perish. I want them to be able to go into the promised land. So that's why I'm going to start counting them from the time that they're little infants, 1 month old. And why even wait a month? Because that was the time period to know that the child was viable. Because in those days, if a child was born before the 9th month, it might not be viable. Once it lives another month, then you know it's viable. But as soon as it's viable, you start counting the tribe of Levi. Now, why was God concerned that they would also perish if they withstood the test of the golden calf? They didn't worship the golden calf. Why would God think that they would join the spies and the reaction to the spies of not wanting to go to the promised land? Because what was the sin of the spies? Moses sends 12 spies, 10 of them come back and say, this is a terrible land, we're not going to be able to conquer it, they're going to destroy us. And all the men cried. And God said, because you cried, you'll never see the land. Anyone over the age of 20 will die in the desert, which is what happened. So God did not want the tribe of Levi to be swept along with everyone else. But why was he so? That's why he said, I'm going to count you from the time you're 1 month, and that will give you the ability to resist and not be part of the rest of the community. So why was he more concerned about that sin than he was about the golden calf? The tribe of Levi did not worship the golden calf. They were strong. So what's the difference between the crime of the golden calf and the spies? One difference is that the golden calf was not a national crime. Everyone was affected, but how many people actually worship the golden calf? A very small minority, a few thousand. How many Jews, how many men cried that night when they were told that they're going to have to go to the promised land and they were told how horrible it is? All the men, the entire nation of men over the age of 20. So when you're swept up by this mass hysteria, even you could be strong, but the power of the masses is something that even strong people have a hard time resisting. The very opening of the Code of Jewish Law is, don't be deterred by the cynics. When a whole country tells you this is not right, how are you going to stand up to them? And that's the power to resist the masses, was something that God says, I have to give them special power for that. That they resisted those who wanted to worship the golden calf, okay, they were not, it wasn't a majority of the people. But when it's the majority of the people, that's a little bit more difficult. Another difference is that the golden calf was certainly a betrayal. Here they were putting up a replacement for Moses, a replacement for God. It didn't. Anyone who was a little bit sensitive would know this. It's not so kosher. Something is very wrong. But not wanting to go into Israel, we discussed many times, the Alter Rebbe says, was because they were so spiritual they couldn't bear going into a normal country and cultivating it, fighting wars. They wanted to stay in the desert where they had all their needs taken care of and they could just devote their lives to spirituality. And the Levites were especially vulnerable in that regard because they were much more passionate, they were much more spiritual than their brethren, and therefore God says, I'm very concerned that they might be swept along with that decision not to go to the promised land. That's why I have to give them special energy at the age of a month, that they are going to be my people and they will be able to withstand everything. It says in the Torah, you shall appoint the Levites. The Hebrew word for appointing is hafged. Hafged, appoint. And it's pointed out that there's another verse where that word is used in the Torah. In the book of Psalms, hafged olav rasha, appoint someone wicked on him. So there's a midrash, a very strange midrash that says that the two verses are connected. Appointing someone to a position of power is an indication that there's something wicked about him. What does that mean? So one of the commentators explains, when a person has power, he gets a new Yetzer Hara, a new evil inclination. Actually, it says that person who comes to power, is all of his sins are forgiven. He starts a new slate. So on election day or the inauguration day, the president has a clean slate. And then he starts to mess up anew.
Start of the semester?
No, he has to rise to greatness. He has to be appointed to a high position. And then all his past is erased. So you think, well, it's great that being a leader means I have nothing to worry about. No, you first have to start worrying. Why? Because you get a new kind of evil impulse that you'd never had before. Before you rose to power, what kind of inclinations did you have? What kind of impulses? What every normal human being has. You pursue temptation, you pursue money. These are normal things that people covet and people pursue. But once you get to power, it's a new ball game. It's a totally new, uncharted territory because you didn't have this before.
Totally true.
You don't even realize how much you are going to be challenged. And the fact that you are more challenged, you would think, well, that should deter you from wanting to stay in power. No, that's part of the challenge because once you're there, you don't want to leave it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a drug. Once you are hooked on the drug, you can't stop.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it means, that when a person rises and he's appointed to something, it means he has a new challenge that challenges him, that he could be a Russia, he could be a wicked person in a new way that he never had before. So that's what people in leadership have to know, that they have additional challenges. And the problem is that they don't come to the Parsha class, so they don't know this. The Kotzker Rebbe, who always found ways of saying very sharp and very controversial things, said, no, this takes it literally. He says, why would they punish you to become a leader? That's the worst punishment. It's because you're a Russia, you're a wicked person. And they said, what's going to be your punishment? You'll be elected president of the United States. You'll be elected governor. You'll become the chief of something. Because you're evil, that's your punishment.
I'm the vice president of Kadima.
So that is his way of showing how, especially in the Hasidic community, leadership was looked down upon as a necessary, as a punishment. that it's you have no choice, but it's not something that you would ever want if you're in that caliber of person. It's interesting that it gives you the census of every tribe. How many Levites were there?
35,000.
How many?
35,000.
No.
No?
12.
I know Yehuda was the highest.
Yehuda had the largest, but Yehuda was counted from 20 and up, and he had over 70,000. The tribe of Levi had about 22,000. Why was the tribe of Levi? It's like half of the smallest other tribe. The other smallest had about 40 something. Why was the tribe of Levi so small compared to the others? So Ramban, Nachmanides says, because the tribe of Levi were not enslaved in Egypt. The proliferation of Jews in Egypt, in the Torah mentions, was in direct proportion with their persecution. The more they were persecuted, the more they would multiply. The Egyptians tried to persecute them to reduce their numbers, and the more they tried to reduce their numbers, the more they proliferated. The tribe of Levi never were part of the enslavement. That's why Moses and Aaron could go to the palace and leave at will. They weren't slaves. Why was the tribe of Levi not enslaved? Because the whole slavery was a ruse. Pharaoh announced a project that every one of the countries was going to get involved in to rebuild Egypt. And he was going to pay everyone. And Pharaoh himself came to the workplace and did the menial labor of the other workers. So the Jews, of course, are very patriotic, and they're grateful to Egypt for giving them a home. So they all joined, and they got money for it. The tribe of Levi said, no, that's not our role. Our role was to be the teachers, to carry on the legacy of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the Levites refused to become workers. Once they regimented everyone into slavery, because they had everyone at the workplaces and everyone was doing the work, and little by little they stopped paying them and they started to force them to work. The tribe of Levi was never part of that. And because they were never part, they didn't multiply. So that tells you something very powerful, that the more we have suffered over the ages, the more we will prosper in the future. What God has in store for the Jewish people is infinitely more than all the other nations that have not been subjected to the same amount of suffering. At the end of the Parsha, talks about how they dismantled the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and they would have to cover up all the utensils, all the vessels, and the Levites would transport it. They were not allowed to watch as the vessels were being covered. It says if they do that, they will die. They had to, the vessels were taken by the Kohanim, covered up, and then the Leviim would take it and transport it. They weren't allowed to look at the vessels. The Kohen was allowed to. Why was the Kohen allowed to, the Levi not allowed to? What was wrong with looking at the vessel?
It's too holy.
But they looked at it when they were in the temple.
Exactly.
Right, but when there's a law in the Torah that you're not allowed to see a king when he's not in his royal attire. You can't watch a king take a haircut. You can't certainly see the king undressed. It's not appropriate. Why? Because then you see the king in a non-regal state, and you lose your respect and reverence for the king. When the vessels are being used, part of the service, then you appreciate their importance, their holiness. When the vessels are just hanging around, waiting to be covered up, there's a danger that you might just trivialize their importance. You won't see their importance. The Kohen, on the other hand, that was his job to cover them up, so he was performing a function. So when you perform a function with something, you see its value. And that's a very important lesson, that when do you see someone's value? We all have intrinsic value, but when do you really see the value? When they're engaged in doing a mitzvah.
It's like in the secular world, it's like when women put on makeup. Don't look at me until I put my makeup on. That's just in the secular world.
Right. Now, we can take this as a metaphor as well. We are all holy vessels, but you have to be the right person to see a holy vessel that's not covered up. There's a difference between a Kohen and a Levi. A Levi comes from the attribute of Gevura, of judgment. Kohen is chesed, is kindness. When a person became a leper, not a leper, but it was a skin disease called mitzaras, which is usually translated as leprosy, but it's not, only a Kohen could declare you unclean. Why a Kohen? Because to say that someone is unclean, that someone is defective, you have to be a person of kindness.
Mm-hmm.
To tell someone off, you have to be motivated by love. Only then could you tell someone off and tell them what they have to repair. If you're a person of judgment, harsh judgment, you should keep your judgment to yourself and get the Kohen to do it. Don't do it directly, because then it's going to be, you're going to be focusing on the fault and not on the person, not on the corrective measures. So when you're dealing with a holy vessel, which is every one of us, and we're not covered up, and we're not engaged in a spiritual service, we're just lying around, you need a Kohen's look to see that person, not the Levi's look.
Mm-hmm.
The Levi could see it when it's engaged. You see a Jew doing a mitzvah, even the judgmental Jew could say, oh, he's doing a mitzvah, he's a great guy. But when you don't see him doing a mitzvah, the Kohen could still see that he's a holy vessel. The Levi might, what's wrong with him? He's not really accomplishing anything.
Doesn't it also suggest that the Kohen has a lot more wisdom?
Well, it's not necessarily. The Levium could have been, since it's hereditary, there's no guarantee that you will have more wisdom just because your father was a Kohen, or your grandfather was one. It says when they looked at the tsaras, at the skin disease, the Kohen may not have known all the laws. So the Kohen would have to hire a scholar to come with him, and the scholar would examine it, and he would tell the Kohen, it's no good. And the Kohen would say, Tameh, it's unclean. If the Kohen, unless the Kohen himself was a scholar, then he can do it himself. So not every Kohen was a scholar. But the way Kohen sees things is, he sees things in a kind way.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Torah says that the Levi shouldn't look at the vessels when it's being covered up, Vamesu, and they will die. So the word dying in Hebrew means literally dying, but it also has another meaning. The Zohar says that when a person falls down to a lower level, that's a form of death. And if the Levi looks at another Jew and he makes a judgment because the Jew is not covered up, then he will decline. He will lose some of his own spirituality. So being judgmental of others when it's not your role and you're not doing it with kindness and love has a deleterious effect on the person. So you're coming from a vantage point of, I'm a Levi, I'm a spiritual holy person, and I'm telling you that you're defective.
Do Levi's judge Kohanim? And the temptation is you're not very good.
Well, this is just a generalization because you can have Kohanim who are very judgmental and not nice people, and you have Leviim who are very nice. In fact, today is a very important day. Today or yesterday, it's the yahrzeit of Shmuel Hanavi, the prophet Shmuel. You don't remember him?
Yeah.
Samuel.
He only lived about 2,800 years ago.
Right.
Never met him.
Never met him. He was a Levi. He was a tough man. He was pretty tough. But he was a Levi. And Aaron was a Kohen, is the epitome of love. but there are Leviim that are known for their love, and Kohanim who are known for their...
Being SOPs.
Actually, the Talmud says has to be reconciled with the understanding that a Kohen is a man of kindness. The Talmud says that Kohanim get very angry quickly.
The Kohen gets angry.
Right, Kohen.
He's so filled with love.
Oh, so that's the question.
His emotion.
But there are people who are very easily angered, but that's only on the outside. They calm down very quickly because they're kind people. Everyone gets angry when things don't go their way. The problem is when the anger lingers and it doesn't dissipate. The Kohen's anger, there's a law in the Talmud that when a man gives his wife a bill of divorce, if he's a Kohen, it has to be written in a different way. It's written in a way where you fold the lines, the paper, and then you sew them together. It takes much longer. Why? Because a Kohen cannot marry a divorcee. So what happens if a Kohen one day he gets into an argument with his wife and he runs to the rabbi and says, I'm giving her a get. It takes 45 minutes to do. 45 minutes he gives his wife the get. 10 minutes later he says, what did I do? Why did I do this? I got into an argument, but I was stupid. I want to go back to her. No, you can't. She's a divorced woman. You can't remarry her if you're a Kohen. So the rabbis deliberately made a law that when you write a get for a Kohen, the process of the get takes much, much longer. So by the time you finish the get, before it's delivered and takes effect,
It's time to think about it.
he can change his mind. I know of an actual case. The man is not alive anymore. He was a Kohen, and he got into some arguments with his wife, and I don't know exactly what happened. So he said to his wife, "Do you want to get?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, let's go." And then he regretted it later. Nothing he can do.
So a Kohen, once he's divorced, can't marry, or he can't marry a divorcee.
He can't marry any divorcee. He can marry anyone else.
So he can marry, he can
Yeah,
remarry.
sure,
He just
sure.
can't marry a divorcee.
Right, but if he wants to remarry his own wife,
Right.
it's too late. He can't do
Versus
it.
his divorcee.
Right. And again, getting back to the point before, the person who was not charged with judging, who was judgmental, which means he's coming from a perspective, I'm holier than thou, and I'm looking down at you, he falls down to that level.
Right. And to fall down, it's like, I mean, if you're a great scholar, or you're a very pious man, and it's like the Alter Rebbe makes a point that if you're at a very high level and you have a very, very minor sin, it's serious. While if I sin, it doesn't have that same gravity as someone who is at a very high level.
Right. It doesn't pay to be at a high level. Then.
Right. It doesn't pay to be too high. You know, we kind of when you were talking before about that, you need to come in with no opinion, and you need to come in listening, without any preconceived ideas.
Right.
What occurred to me was you were giving the perfect exact description of the first word of Shema. That was Shema, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's what one needs to do.
Yeah, that's
Just
next week.
Shema. To get Shema exactly right
Right.
was exactly what you were saying.
Okay.
Then. And then everything else,
That
if you
we'll
get
be discussing next week. I
yeah,
believe,
if you get
on
that,
the Institute.
but if you get that right, then everything else follows, right? If you get that, if you really can get Shema right.
One of the Rebbe's reviewers, someone who would memorize, the Rebbe would speak something over the course of a few days for 10, 12 hours.
Yeah.
And people would have to, on Shabbos and holiday, there's no tape recorder, no way of recording it. So they asked this person, Simon Jacobson is the one. They asked him how did he do it, and he said, I mean, he happens to have a very good memory. He says when he listens to the Rebbe, he would not try to analyze anything the Rebbe said. As soon as you start trying to analyze it, then
Shma's done.
you don't, you're not receptive to it.
Right.
So you'll miss a lot of it. So they turn their minds into a blank. Just focus on what did the Rebbe say. After when they reviewed it and they put it down in writing, they started to analyze it. And if they had any questions, they would ask the Rebbe, and that way it would clarify what the Rebbe said. But while they were listening, you can't do both at the same time.
You know, that whole concept has been taken into Buddhism, because Buddhism absolutely follows that to a T, exactly the point that we make in Shema, exactly. That it's a way to live. It's a guide to living, really, right? What better way can you show love to another person than by doing that? When you listen to completely submerge yourself and completely open your ears up to them. I mean, that's the recipe for love.
It's easier said than done.
Easier said than done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry I